The VR headset is a wonderful thing with limitless possibilities. It can make you feel like you are somewhere much more pleasant than you really are. For example, if you lived in a dreary hellscape such as Ohio, you could instead be slaying zombies in a post-apocalypse playing Arizona Sunshine. However, the main detractor to the VR experience is that VR is expensive. So, in reality, it is much cheaper to visit California to get a zombie apocalypse experience. So, what remains for individuals who wish to have a visceral experience beyond mashing buttons on dirty controllers? Why, the Kinect, of course. Yes, the Xbox Kinect, quite possibly the most loathed peripheral in all of interactive entertainment, the bane of any gamer's existence in the 2010s. For those who are of the Fortnite demographic, the Kinect was a curious device birthed by Microsoft so they could compete with the Nintendo Wii. Because the Wii had motion controls, it made certain games like bowling very immersive to play, thus allowing for grandma to buy it and play it once until it became a permanent unused fixture of the entertainment cabinet. However, the Wii had a remote while the Kinect had no remote. You were the controller, which in a conceptual manner is neat, but in a practical manner is perplexing, confounding, and in all manner of senses, just kinda dumb. Microsoft thought they knew better than the gamer. They were gonna teach us the ways of how cool the Kinect could be. But by God, when they made that stupid thing for the Xbox One, Microsoft learned real quick that they were real fucking wrong. Today, the Kinect is forgotten. People that hate the Kinect will tell you horror stories of it never functioning, and people who did enjoy it are actually confusing it with the board game. You may be wondering now why I just went from VR to a tirade about the Kinect, but that is because throughout the Kinect's downtrodden and hated life, there was but a small sampling of games that are actually somewhat, quite possibly, while under consideration, still worth playing. One of them being Steel Battalion Heavy Armor, a game that I already made a video on but cannot generally recommend because you need the patience of a patron saint to learn how to play it, but go try it. Yet, one game does accurately try and succeed in replicating what the VR does now before VR even existed, and that is, of course, Rise of Nightmares. Developed by Sega and released in 2011, Rise of Nightmares is a first-person hack-and-slash horror game. However, it is a Kinect exclusive, so in lieu of pressing a button on your greasy controller, you flail about into empty space. However, which I just said, unlike the eons of random shovelware and dance games that were spat out by Microsoft upon the Kinect, Rise of Nightmares has ambition. It was the first rated M game for the Kinect, and this was a period in gaming history where everything needed to be edgy. The devs needed to make a darker, edgier, more hardcore stance on every franchise once considered family-friendly. The Wii was for babies. This was the age of Mountain Dew and low-grade corn chips. So, the Kinect needed a hardcore, bloody zombie adventure. And the best part is that unlike Steel Battalion or Sonic Free Riders, where you need a play space similar to a warehouse without a roof to have viable controls, Rise of Nightmares is actually playable to normal people. It is quite unfortunate, then, that the game overall was met with a collective Yet, now that the Kinect, pieces of dust, and etc. have settled, looking back at what Rise of Nightmares did, it can not only be examined as foreshadowing to what gaming would inevitably become with VR, but is also a very excellent example of taking the Kinect's capabilities as far as it could feasibly go, to a rather disappointing extent. Playing Rise of Nightmares is easy, both from a financial perspective, yet also from an accessibility standpoint. If you have ever participated in a Nerf sword battle, or punched your sibling for being a nerd, you have already performed the controls of the game. Being a hacker and a slasher, dispatching an enemy is as simple as making a slice, and much like a slice of pie, this is actually pretty sweet. I've never played a VR game before, but I can only so assume that the visceralness of making a slicing hand motion and then seeing said hand digitally carve up a ghoul on screen are one and the same. But do not think that slicing is the only action you perform, for there is also a chainsaw, which is used by placing your hands out forward, a hammer, which you pound down on your foes, brass knuckles that allow you to flail about like a Waffle House employee, and my favorite, throwing knives. There is no cooler weapon in any Xbox 360 game. This is a fact you cannot argue with me, and that is simply because you have never played Rise of Nightmares, and thus have never experienced throwing a digital knife at zombie nurses with large boobs. Now that I look back, a lot of enemies in this game are oddly sexualized, but in a rather grotesque way, which I can only assume to be some gothic tropeness of horror. And in fact, everything about this game is a gothic horror trope. Large castle, elaborate experimental torture devices, secret macabre experiments, occult dark magic nonsense, a gypsy character telling you your ill-fated fortune. It's all the gothic horror you want, and does not do anything interesting with it. The story does have the main villain cross-dressing, pretending to be his dead wife. I can only assume this is some sort of unusual homage to Ashford from Resident Evil Code Veronica, as it's certainly not some sort of gothic horror trope I'm aware of, but it's presented without any sort of build-up that I can only assume the game was looking at me thinking, what, you didn't know that this dude was dressing up as his dead wife? Well, I didn't. So, I actually found myself quite perplexed when the female villain character I kept seeing earlier in the game suddenly had a stereotypically evil German voice at this distractingly bizarre zombie Far Cry 3 dance rave.
There she is. Right on time. I do so admire promptness. Don't you, my husband?
Of course, beloved. Thank you for bringing her right to us.
Suffice to say, the gameplay story is rather blandly generical, and despite it leaning in hot and heavy in its marketing that it is scary, this game is not spooky in the slightest. Not least because of dominatrix zombies with huge tits, the main character making the most dumbass observations, or the fact that the secondary villain is first met with a dog body. No. The game is not scary because, unlike every other horror game, which tells you to play in the dark with your blankie nearby so you can cover your eyes with the scary bits, Rise of Nightmares requires you to play in a brightly lit room. The Kinect is a camera, and a camera needs light to function. If you play this game in the dark, the Kinect will hate you. It won't see you. It will ignore you, like that jackass at the liquor store who won't help me get alcohol off the top shelf because I look 16. The Kinect only works in light, so making a horror game only function in the bright alongside having to wave frantically in front of the screen to make it function is not practically scary, but alas, it does not even seem to want to be scary anyway. In fact, this game gives off very strong House of the Dead vibes, which is Sega's premier zombie or creature shooting game. The range of engagement is the same, the campiness is at equal measure, and of course the story are both equally illogical and silly. While in House of the Dead you get railed for about 30 minutes with the room to go back again if you want a bit of a higher score, Rise of Nightmares is freely, linearly roamable for 5 hours, not fixed to one orientation, where you can beat off anything that strikes your fancy. Which, of course, brings to question how you look about in this glorious East European hole from hell, and that is, of course, with your feet, both digitally and realistically, for movement in this game is determined by you moving your foot in front of the camera. A simple step will walk you, a foot in the air will run you, turning left and right is done with your shoulders. So what results is me getting an incredible workout, twisting my shoulders on one foot, running around, waving my arms in the air, hitting ghouls. This is, of course, until I realized I'm a fool who knows nothing, because you can actually put your foot on the ground a bit farther and move just as fast. So I spent 5 hours hopping on one leg for nothing, just like at the 3rd grade playground. Apparently, the devs tried to make the original method to move being marching in place, but it was found that Western audiences did not like doing that, so it was reduced to being a stork. And what's more, there were many moments that made me feel like a dork, such as where the puzzle is not done with my mind, but by tepidly moving my shoulders around spinning blades that would make me like meat on a fork if I did not properly analyze where my digital shoulders were relative to where my bony shoulders were IRL. Luckily, if you reach up your hand like you are asking a small question, the game enters game journalist mode, where you automatically walk around the exact path needed to get you to your next destination. So the game is basically playing itself. Except, of course, during the areas I previously described where you still get forked. Compared to VR, where you can either actually walk around or maybe even do the little VR teleport, this is a rather odd middle ground, quite in contrast to how well the fighting system in the game works. Luckily, the rather unusualness of the walking system does not translate to how you lock on to the ghouls that are scattered about the mansion, as all you do is raise your arms up into a fighting stance and your main character locks on to the nearest villain in the vicinity. Performing this action is also your block, where you can block virtually everything aside for the variety of things that you can't. Considering this is a 7th generation console game, when regenerating health was the hot new thing in every game, so too does Rise of Nightmares. However, this is not so much of a trendy decision, but more of a necessary one, as the prospect of having an inventory system that only works with motion controls would quite possibly, unequivocally, without question, be a pretty stinky thing to have to do. It is already, in the most stressful moments, rather stressful to have to reach out and snag some weapons off the ground as a stressful gaggle of enemies surround your whereabouts. To have to do that alongside healing yourself, my god, that would be so jank, so awful. I really wanted to see how they would do it. There are odd moments where you have to wipe off bugs and other miscreants off your arms, so maybe if some sort of healing system was added, where you needed to Far Cry 3 your arm up in front of the Kinect, that would have been super de-duper dope impressive. But alas, as the game will forever remain, it is quite easy. Combat flows as such. See the enemy, raise your arms for a lock-on, walk over to him like a Western duel is starting, and then engage in Souls-esque battle, where you attack, and then block, attack, and then block, and then do it all over again. Sometimes the groovy ghoul is at range, sometimes he has a goofy gadget, but in all cases they make very similar sounds after you splatter their brains across the floor. Other intriguing and diverse gameplay elements include hiding from a tyrant-like enemy, fighting the tyrant-like enemy as a boss, and then becoming the tyrant-like enemy. To be honest, the boss fights in this game, while kinda easy like all the rest of the game, are all rather pleasantly different. For they are not just a large enemy with mucho health though, but rather a unique enemy with an interesting gameplay gimmick to go alongside it, which in most cases, will almost always, without question, involve you having to dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge, and attack IRL. These are actually painful for me to do, as my many years of doing cross-country have not been kind to my knees. Yet, I must concedingly admit that this is a very good example of all the capabilities of the Kinect being used, whether it be arm swanging, shoulder bumping, knee crackling, and feet kicking. Because how could I forget, if you violently kick IRL, you kick the enemy in-game. I have no idea if VR can replicate your feet kicking, but this is awesome. I can finally relive my warehouse worker fantasy of kicking every stupid fucking box I see. Yet, it is not as fucking cool as a very special weapon you get later in the game. Because, sorry guys, I committed the cardinal sin of writing, for I lied to the audience, as my favorite weapon is not the throwing weapons, but it is the charge hand cannon Azoth. To use it, you place your hand in a silly position to charge it, and then thrust your hand forward to blast it, where all the creatures that happen to be in front of you then become not creatures in front of you. This hand motion you must do is rather complex. I'm actually shocked that the Kinect can see it, much less how it sees you do this actually, surprisingly, rather reliably. Alas, reliability is something the Kinect never had, and so when many points of my praise for this game lay with the fact that I'm just doggone happy it works, it only speaks encyclopedic volumes as to how everything else on the Kinect worked, or maybe didn't work. Rise of Nightmares stands above the smattering of random AAA Kinect games, not because it is acceptable, but rather because it is playable. And when you just get right down to it, if this game was played with a controller, or even a modern VR, it would just not be all that interesting, because the Kinect makes this game, with its kicks and ducks and obtuse menus and all. It is quite possibly the most complex Kinect game that works without special caveats, and thus it can be said that Rise of Nightmares is about as good as the Kinect could get, and thus the only Kinect title I can reliably recommend to you. 7 out of 10, $30 investment. Don't come crying to me when I'm wrong, but also just be glad you didn't buy a $150 Kinect when it was new. Looking back, every other title on the Kinect is just dance, singing, and fitness titles, poorly conceived fighting games, and political propaganda. And most games that have Kinect as an optional control option are simply not worth the optional effort. I can imagine there were people who enjoyed the Kinect, but there is such an overwhelming volume of people who either did not like it or simply didn't own one because there were no substantial games. Maybe a few good indie titles snuck in, but when you think about big, blockbuster selling games, Kinect had none of that. Kinect did not have its halo, which is probably what Microsoft was looking for. And so thus, with all of Microsoft's effort in trying to best Nintendo, they successfully got about 3 games that are worth picking up the Kinect for, but only 1 works without any extra effort. And that is the true folly of Microsoft, spending so much time, so much energy, basically killing the Xbox brand for this stupid peripheral that no one wanted or ever asked for. For a good 3 or 4 years after the 360 came out, there was a clear lead between it and the PlayStation 3. The 360 had a robust digital marketplace, a favorable entry price, and the biggest game of the decade exclusively on it. Whereas Sony was asking for your newborn's weight in cash, airing TV ads showing said children being placed in a bizarre surrealist prison, and then saying, yes, go buy the game with the giant enemy crab.
Game, which is based on Japanese history. The stages of the game will also be based on famous battles which actually took place in ancient Japan. So here's this giant enemy crab.
The neat and creative exclusives that were once only on PS2 were now also on Xbox 360, with many Japanese devs making some of their old PS2 exclusive series only on the 360. There were also a variety of interesting arcade titles available that virtually anyone could enjoy. Yes, there were always the heavy hitters on the Xbox 360, but suddenly you could have an entire ecosystem of AAA Western and Japanese games exclusive to the system, and they all ran very well, unlike some of their inevitable PS3 versions actually being a port to another Microsoft title, PowerPoint. All of these titles are Xbox 360 exclusives, and all of them came out before the vile Kinect reared its ugly head. When the Kinect came out, the PS3 rose to prominence. Microsoft focused solely on their big three exclusive titles and the Kinect. They basically allowed PlayStation to get the lead back and effectively make the PS3 the new PS2 again when it came to being the do-it-all system. Sony played it safe with the PS Move, which was of course their own answer to the Wii, but despite this controller being quite literally a Wii controller in the shape of an indescribable phallic object, it is better than the Kinect. The PS Move does not even have an exclusive game worthy of note at all, but it's simply better than the Kinect because the games that do allow for the PS Move to be utilized become better games, including and they work well. How many games would the Kinect work well? To be fair, the dance games work better on Kinect than they ever could with the Wii or PS Move, but the core dance game audience is not going back to old consoles. Only weird fucking nerds like me are still gaming on the old Dorito box, and what do I want to play? Substantial games. Microsoft sacrificed themselves for the money, for 62 cents to beat the Japanese, something they failed at before, and then again. Only just now are they making up for it. But that is simply because Sony is once again making goofy goober moves when it comes to the PlayStation 5. I don't think they will make the same mistake with the Series X, but they already made two big oopsies before, and I don't think Xbox can afford another mistake, especially with how Phil Spencer keeps poo-pooing on his own product all the time anyway. I hate to see bad video games, and I certainly hate to see bad peripherals. I love special niche video peripherals. I have the biggest and dumbest one ever made sitting and taking up space in my basement. I even made a video dedicated to the Sega Dreamcast fishing rod. I have no hatred for Xbox. My first console was the original Xbox, but right now, I'm not being won over. The only three consoles I have plugged in right now are my 360, PS3, and PS5, as those three consoles allow me to play basically all the games I care about through themselves and their backwards compatibility. Series X ain't plugged in. Maybe for Starfield, but otherwise I'm not impressed. The big bet on Kinect did not work out for Microsoft. Rise of Nightmares being the only worthwhile title to truly work on it is proof, even if it's literally just a VR game with slightly more unnatural controls. And the worst part is that people don't even want to play games like this on VR, they just want to watch porn.